Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
What's going on, movie fans? It's the 2020 Oscar nominations, and we are talking about our 4 biggest takeaways from these nominations. I'm Ryan Nilsen, senior producer of the Popcorn Talk, and I'm joined by the biggest lover of pop culture there is, a writer himself, and another producer here at Popcorn Talk, Mr. Jeffrey C. Graham.
Ryan, it's the day.
It's the day.
Nominations are out. Everything is crazy.
We have to talk about it. It's our Super Bowl, Jeff.
That's what we say. Ryan and I, we go see movies together a lot. Mm-hmm. We don't always agree on film, except for the fact we both love movies. And really, it is, for both of us, the biggest day of the year is the Oscars.
It's huge. It's the day everyone's talking about movies. Everyone's expressing their love for movies. Yeah. And it's almost like it's close to sports as it gets, in that we're all rooting for someone to win. Yeah. We all have a certain film that we love, and we just want to see that acceptance speech, that glory, that recognition for those nominees. So obviously,
the question is, though, Ryan, do we all have a film we love in the race this year? Because it's an interesting year for nomination.
It's very interesting. So they came out this morning.
They did.
And at first, my reaction was, all right, yeah, that's kind of what I expected. And then looking deeper, I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of things. And we're going to be, again, talking about our 4 biggest takeaways from all these nominations. The first being Joker.
And just real quickly, we are talking about our 4 big general takeaways. The network will be doing a ton of in-depth coverage on these nominations. So we won't be talking about a ton of specific snubs today. I mean, it was a great year for film, and they can only capture so many films in these nominations. But rather than specifics, we're talking general here. Subscribe to this network and stay tuned for future coverage if you want more sort of specific coverage on this stuff.
Because a lot of people talk about snubs, and look, there's so many movies that come out each and every year, and they expanded the category for Best Picture to 10 potential nominations because of that fact, but you're just not ever going to get everything. You're not always going to be able to recognize everything. Right. And rather than just deliberate about what we thought was a snub, let's just talk about the takeaways as the Academy as a whole, as the nomination process in general. And again, Joker leads with 11 nominations. Holy cow. I mean, this was a divisive film, but incredibly successful, arguably the most successful film of 2019. Mm-hmm. And it's a comic book film that was, it was being labeled as maybe an incel movie, as maybe having some negative, provoking some negative storytelling themes, but loved by a majority of audiences, and 11 noms. What are your reaction to that?
Well, there's a lot to take away from the fact that Joker is leading the race. First of all, just as you mentioned, culturally, it's very interesting that a comic book movie is leading the nominations race. It's been a very interesting time for comic book properties this decade. Obviously, Marvel's completely changed the game with how film is produced, with what they've done. But whether or not you're like pro-IP or anti-IP franchises taking over critical and commercial attention for film, it's notable. It's a very big deal that this is nominated.
Which nominations in particular? Because for me, we all expected Joaquin. Mm-hmm. We all knew he was getting nominated for Best Actor. I did suspect it to get nominated for Best Picture because of the 10 slots. But like directing with Todd Phillips,
that's very surprising to me, especially because Todd Phillips. We're going to get into sort of what this means optically for the Academy in general. That's sort of our second biggest takeaway. But he's had an interesting media circuit is the way to put it. Todd Phillips, of course, he directed The Hangover. It's kind of been an interesting because, Farrelly was a comedy guy,
right,
who directed Green Book last year. Now we have Todd Phillips nominated for Joker for director. It's sort of the same sort of journey that these two directors have taken.
Right.
But Todd Phillips, of course, went on record as saying he can't direct comedies anymore because there's no room or space.
Culture.
Right. So I don't know. I didn't feel like, at least critics were loving Todd Phillips based on sort of the optics around what he said. Very interesting to me that he's nominated, and I think he's going to have a tricky 3 months ahead of him as he's doing press for this film.
Another thing with Todd Phillips is adapted screenplay.
That also
Joker,
surprised me.
Obviously, it's a comic book character,
right,
but this was a quote-unquote original story. This was an original take on that character. But he takes one of the slots for adapted screenplay where there might have been a lot other options.
I know.
It's whether your thoughts on the film in general, it's a really well-made movie.
Yes.
And I fully expected it to get the production design, the costume, the makeup, the acting. But when you're getting into stuff like screenplay, I think that is going to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, and what's a bummer for me is screenplay is often the category that allows for surprises.
Right. Like a Two Popes nom.
Yeah, exactly. I sort of love when the Academy gives nods to sort of the more play like an example of a movie like Her. That might not get as many wins, but that's a perfect example of an ideal screenplay nomination and win for a movie because the script is what compels the film.
Right.
I'm not sure the script is what's compelling the film Joker. And I would have loved to see something a bit more surprising sneak into this category.
Her being a movie, obviously, for original screenplay, but I think what was just so shocking optically with this nomination is that I would have suspected Joker to really have a good chance if it was nominated for original. Obviously, you can't because it's a character from a comic book film, but I just am really, really taken aback the fact that it got adapted. But yeah, 11 nominations. Not many films have done that, and it's really, I think that's a major surprise.
It's a major surprise, and it's in some ways when you think about it, it's not that surprising because it feels thematically consistent with a lot of what we've gotten in these nominations. One thing that's very interesting to me, though, and I think this is something that needs to be talked about quickly, is the fact that critics are a bit divided on this movie.
Yes.
It might be the lowest RT score of all the Best Picture noms. I don't know whether or not that's exactly true. I might be talking out of my butt, but this isn't like a 95% type of movie.
Right.
So it seems like more and more there's kind of this gap between how critics feel about film and how the Academy feels about film.
Yeah, 69 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
But obviously the audience score 88, and it made $1 billion.
Yeah.
Again, one of the most successful films of 2019.
It's interesting.
It's surprising.
No matter how it performs, the fact that it's leading is a big milestone, and you can't help but see that signpost sort of casting a shadow over all of the rest of the nominations.
Just to chime in here for a second, it is actually, in fact, the lowest one at 69%.
Wow.
Everything is not.
Wow.
Every other one, Jojo Rabbit is the lowest one besides that with an 80%. Everything else is over 80%.
11% higher.
Yeah.
And that is the voice of Vito, our producer, who's
Scotty.
wonderful.
Hello, everybody.
and-
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, and feel free to hop in, Vito, because you've seen a lot of these movies too, and also a really brilliant film scholar.
Absolutely. I think that this is a perfect lead-in, though, to
Yeah.
our second major takeaway, which was the Academy optics problems. Over the past few years, 4 years ago, in fact, when Chris Rock hosted the Oscars, there was the Oscars So White hashtag going around. And since then, the Academy has said that they've been making these steps, that they've brought in a whole bunch of people, a lot more diverse crowd into the Academy to try and quote unquote fix that, to try and make the nominations a little bit more diverse, or maybe even surprising. And I just think it's had the opposite effect, quite honestly. I don't think that those moves have adequately made changes in any way, shape, or form. And I think that is the biggest insult in that is the one person of color nominated for an acting nom is for Harriet, which is a slave character. And I mean, I personally haven't seen Harriet, but the fact is there are these other performances on the table, specifically Lupita Nyong'o for us. And whether that's a campaign problem with certain films, maybe campaigning for their performers, it's not your action steps are not showing the results.
Well, and not only was Lupita shut out, but Us in general was completely shut out. That feels crazy to me. Us personally, I think was one of the best films we saw all year.
Right.
That's just my take. I personally think it's even better than Get Out.
And another successful film, and you can argue, hey, it came out earlier in the year, but so did Get Out.
Yep.
So did Black Panther.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's kind of out the window, as well as The Farewell. That's another.
I mean,
another
J-Lo
movie.
and Hustlers.
J-Lo
I mean,
and Hustlers.
There's a ton of performances we could be talking about right now.
It's just kind of it doesn't support that argument that they are making these steps.
And it's interesting to think, I think the other sort of tangential thesis to this moment is the fact that Joker is the most nominated film.
Gosh.
Not to reduce the film, because I think it's a well-made film, but at its core, it is kind of a movie about how it can be really hard to be a white guy in society nowadays. And that's the movie the Academy chose to say, this is the most numerically notable film of the year. This story matters so much that we want to give it the most nominations we can. And it's about a tough life for a white dude.
You could definitely read that. I think one thing I would love to know, I would just want to see the numbers. I want to see the votes. I want to see how many votes was Greta Gerwig away from getting that Best Director nom.
Yeah.
How many votes was Lupito? Or just, I want to see what goes into it, because you just can't, as an Academy, advocate that you're taking these action steps and then when it's just the results aren't there. I need to
point.
see the stats. And, we see these stats for actual elections in the country. We see them for sports. I don't know why we can't see them for the Academy Awards.
Here's a question I have. I'm wondering if they should or if they will broaden the director's category to up to 10 nominations. Because right now, there's 10 slots for picture. There are 10 performance slots for men and women.
Yeah.
And there are 10 screenplay slots. Granted, they're divided into original and adapted.
Correct.
But there's only 5 director slots. Maybe it's time we open up that category.
That is a great point. And, even tying it back into sports, college football used to have a problem with their championship games, with their playoffs, in that there weren't enough bowl games and not enough schools are being recognized. And there's so many schools, there's so many college sports teams, and now there's 1,000 bowl games.
Right.
And whether or not, they matter, they still have their day in the sun. They still have their day in the limelight. And I think that is a great point. They should expand a lot of these categories. That is probably a quick and easy solution to a lot of these optic problems.
Even if it's only the director's category, because for those big 5 categories, which are performance, screenplay, supporting, those, we all know the big 5, to have the director category opened up would give more chances, which may at least help in the meantime.
Right.
Yeah. So I will say, speaking of directors, though, and speaking of where the Academy may be doing better,
Our third takeaway, Parasite.
had an amazing showing at this year's Oscars.
Great showing. I know people wanted to see maybe some of the actors get recognized. I personally didn't expect that to happen.
Yeah.
But wow, Bong Joon-ho, Best Director. It gets a Screenplay nom. It gets a Best Picture nom. A lot of noms at the Academy Awards this year. And this is a foreign language film. Also, they just deemed it international.
Yes.
For this year. I couldn't be happier. We saw this movie together.
We sure did.
Probably my favorite movie of the year.
Ryan and I saw this movie.
Yeah.
We went to walk to our cars, and I was like, Ryan, I don't think I can drive home without talking about this movie with you.
And we talked for about an hour.
We sure did. That's the sign of a great film. And I think I'm glad to see Parasite doing so well. For as much as the Academy's lacking with both women and talent of color this year, I think this movie does represent a shift towards a more international Academy.
It's a game changer.
It's a game changer.
I think it is. I think, even when this movie was premiering at festivals, was in limited release, all the buzz, all the praise was, hey, if subtitles aren't for you, this is the one you see. Which I think that's really high praise. And there aren't a lot of international or foreign language films in recent years that I think have gotten that kind of label with them.
Totally.
They haven't been spoken about as like, I know that's not for you, but this is the one you need to see. And it is that good, people.
Right.
And I think that, if this does have a serious shot at getting Best Picture and being the first foreign language film at getting Best Picture.
Yeah, we're not going to talk a ton about projecting winners. We'll have other segments down the road that are, but I think it could win Best Picture, and I think it's very likely to win Best Director, which would be very interesting because I was looking at the Best Director winners for the last decade.
The stats.
And the only American winner is Damien Chazelle.
Wow.
So it would be really interesting if Bong won. That would at least optically represent a shift toward the Academy recognizing international voices, even if they're having trouble recognizing ethnically diverse voices.
So it had a great showing.
Yes.
It's a really notable thing from these Academy Awards. I think it's a positive, notable thing.
I do too.
A big positive takeaway. The last takeaway I think we had was it's Netflix. Netflix leads. And, Netflix just started getting into their original films within the past 5 or 6 years. And I think the first year that they were really gunning for some award recognition was with Beasts of No Nation, which got nothing. It got completely shut out at the Oscars. And, last year they had Roma, and that got a Best Picture nom. That got
Director win.
a director win. This year, I think the conversation of, is Netflix, are they shutting that out? Do people consider Netflix films to be actual movies? That conversation is mute. They lead with the studio noms. They have Two Popes getting noms. They have The Irishman. Scorsese made a Netflix movie this year. And Marriage Story, of course. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, Netflix in general has so rapidly completely turned this town upside down. We're based in LA, so living here is living in the industry. And the way, even just the amount of money Netflix puts into marketing, I'm sure helps this stuff. But you look at Emmys, it's the same thing. I can't remember this year whether or not HBO or Netflix led in nominations, but it was it's been neck and neck between those two services.
Right.
Whereas HBO in the zeros was considered like the front runner for prestige TV. So Netflix has completely changed the game. What's interesting to me is to note how this is going to affect the reputation of theatrical releases being the fuel of the fire of Oscars.
Right. Theatrical versus streaming.
Because Netflix is the leading studio. Basically, 20% of the Best Picture nominations are streaming movies.
Wow.
And it makes you wonder what services like Hulu and Disney are thinking as we enter a very real period of the streaming wars.
Right.
Hulu changed the game with Handmaid's Tale. That became a huge critical and awards contender. With a studio like Disney Plus, Disney always has a great showing in the animated category. Will they start releasing animated exclusive films only on Disney Plus to see what it does for their service? What does this mean for film? I don't necessarily know.
What does it mean, and how do you guarantee to keep theatrical releases relevant? And I think going back to, we're not going to really identify a lot of snubs, but there are a lot of theatrical films this year that were very popular, Joker aside, that didn't get much attention this year. You know, Avengers Endgame, yeah, it's a comic book film. It's the end of this big saga. It's a big blockbuster. But hey, it was a phenomenal film, and a lot of people loved it. A lot of young people loved it too. And it only got a visual effects nom. I think that is the movie that you have to keep in mind with this type of stuff. If you want to keep that theatrical experience, that theatrical movie-going love relevant, you might need to back a lot of those movies that you think the younger crowd is going to enjoy as well.
I know. It's interesting for the Academy out of one side of their mouth to be saying, like, we want to honor the traditional cinematic film-going experience,
films.
But on the other side of their mouth, nominate 2 Netflix films.
Right.
I'm not saying whether or not it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I'm not sure exactly if the Academy has an idea of what films they should and are deeming to be important if they support a theatrical distribution model.
And with streaming alone, one thing to note is that those 2 films that were not with The Irishman, Marriage Story, they did have that theatrical run that I think really vamped up the hype. Like The Irishman in theaters, now most people saw it on Netflix over Thanksgiving break, but when that was in theaters, man, that was being talked about everywhere.
Well, maybe everywhere, but it's tough sometimes as our filter is Los Angeles.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if people in Utah were running out to go see Marriage Story in a theater.
I don't think they could. I think they only could see it in Netflix, but that theatrical run that it did have just generated so much hype that when it did come out on Netflix, when it did get released on a streaming platform, man, everyone just flaunted to it. That's all we were talking about in November was The Irishman.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's a really unique tactic for a streaming service to take when they release their films, especially when it comes to awards. I mean, you can even go back to like Amazon Prime with Manchester by the Sea. That was in theaters for a really long time, and then it was on the platform, and I think a lot of people saw it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Notice they don't have anything this year. I really do think that it's just showing a lot of these streaming platforms, that's a really unique way to market their films moving forward and to get Academy praise.
Yeah.
But then again, you can just point out Dolomite. That's another one. Netflix release. Everyone kind of shied away from it. I don't know if that's because of what Eddie Murphy said at the Oscars many years ago or for other reasons, optic reasons, but doesn't look great. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating. You can't say it across the board either way. But those were our 4 major takeaways. Do you have any final thoughts on these noms, Jeff?
You know, I think it's funny. In some ways, it feels like a surprising list of nominations, but I also sort of, at least with Best Picture, kind of presumed these would be the 9 that were going to come out. So I don't know. I think this year doesn't represent a huge culture shift for the Academy, you know? So it'll be interesting to see how the awards actually shake out. And I would love to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments below.
Please.
If you disagree with any of our takeaways or think that we're missing a major trend that we can gather from what was nominated this year, we'd love to hear your thoughts down below.
Love to hear your thoughts down below. Uncut gems cut from the Oscar noms fully. We'd just love to hear who you thought were the biggest snubs. What were your major takeaways from the Oscars? Thank you so much for watching our 4 major takeaways for the Popcorn Talk Network. I'm Ryan Nilsen. You can find me at Ryan Nilsen on Twitter and at Ryan Nilsen on Instagram. Jeff, where can people find you?
You guys can find me on Twitter at Jeffrey C. Graham for the very small Venn diagram of fans who are watching this who also love The Bachelor. I do cover that show on Mondays, actually tonight at 7 p.m. on our sister network AfterBuzz TV, so go check that out.
Thank you so much for watching. See you at the movies.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.